Tuesday. March Madness is on the rise, and it's just the tournament just kicked off today with the first four playing. So we figured we'd do a basketball related podcast. We're gonna give you some top 10.
Basketball, give me the ball, because I'm gonna dunk it. Yes, indeed. We're talking hoops. We're talking basketball. Most specifically, I guess we're talking basketball movies. So we're going to go through 10 of our favorite basketball movies. I don't know, once you hear the list, if we could necessarily claim that these were the 10 best basketball movies, especially since we came up with the list and then I rewatched a bunch of them. And some of them held up well on rewatch, others not so much, but whatever. These are just 10 of our favorite basketball movies of all time.
Correctamundo. And yeah, I can't really elaborate on that that much. Yeah, these aren't all great movies, but I mean, sports movies have a common thread, and then basketball sports movies have a common thread. They have a lot of common threads. So I guess we'll get into that as we go. So you just want to kick off our first. Oh, if you're listening, I have my Lakers shirt on. Martin has his Toronto Raptors shirt on, and so
We're rocking our favorite
we're
teams.
we're in costume. So you want to just get into our first movie then, Martin?
Well, before I do that, let's go through some of the ones. I mean,
Yeah.
obviously, there's a million different basketball movies out there. Actually, well, way more than I had remembered when I started looking into this. And so there were a whole bunch that we didn't even include in our personal list. Basically, we shared lists with each other and then narrowed it down to 10. And we didn't even have movies like Above the Rim, Teen Wolf, Blue Chips. None of these ones were even on our lists. But here are some of the ones in the also receiving votes category. So Juana Man, Like Mike, Basketball Diaries. This is one. It's entirely my fault. This didn't make it onto the list because, embarrassingly enough, I've actually never seen the movie, so I couldn't put it in my top 10, and so it didn't make it. Glory Road and Love and Basketball. So those five movies did not make our final 10, but are honorable mentions, I suppose.
Yeah, and our algorithm for choosing these are was extremely scientific and scientifically accurate. So,
Exactly.
but to your point, I had never seen your top two or not your top two, but two of the movies that we're going to discuss were your choices that I had never even heard of before. So I had to kind of cram and watch as much of those as I could. So
Yeah, and I had to rewatch some movies that I hadn't probably seen since the 90s. So we'll get to some of those as we move along the list. But let's start off with number 10 on our list, and that is going to be Hustle. So Hustle is a 2022 Netflix movie, so it's the newest movie on our list. Stars Adam Sandler, and it came from his production company and that massive deal that Sandler has with Netflix that I think now is a deal for about $275 million or something like that. Yeah, north of that even at this point. So in this movie, Sandler plays a basketball scout who's tired of the grind of constantly being on the road, trying to find the next big star. And he's really becoming worn out until he finds a star, but what he thinks is going to be a star in Spain. And so then the rest of the movie is mostly about him trying to take this guy under his wing and navigate him over the obstacles of everything that it takes to actually make the NBA. So I just really think that it's an interesting movie. A lot of these movies, well, pretty much all of them that we're going to discuss today, exist in the context of what's happening in the world of basketball when these movies were made. And in this one, I think the context is two things. One, there's a massive influx of international basketball players into the NBA right now. In the last six MVPs have been foreign born. Well, the last six MVP awards have been won by foreign born players. It's actually only three players, but there hasn't been an American that's won it in the last 6 years. So that says a lot about the influx of international talent. But I think there's also something about scouting and about finding an unknown star. And for a while there, this was a big thing, but it hasn't really happened in a while where you can find
Mm.
this player that just comes out of nowhere with everybody having access to game film, YouTube clips all around the world. It doesn't happen very often. And the last one was probably Giannis, right? And eventually, obviously, he became first round pick, but he really came out of nowhere in about 2 years. So I think it also kind of asks the question: are there really diamonds in the rough anymore in the game?
Yeah, yeah, that's a really good point. And like I said, I'd never heard of this film before, but I'm glad you recommended it because Adam Sandler to me is kind of wasted on comedy these days. And I think that's the case for quite a few people, and that includes like Jim Carrey, Bill Murray, even like Ray Romano came out with a pretty good miniseries where he was doing a drama this year. But I think drama is actually comedy is so underrated. Comedy is way harder to do than drama.
It is.
And I think Adam Sandler's forays into drama and Uncut Gems and this work and like Punch Drunk Love were all just like really really good. So I always admire when he steps out of his kind of comfort zone instead of doing like Grown Ups 5 or whatever. So yeah,
Exactly.
and it's a very impressive cast here. You know, he's married to Queen Latifah. Uh, I really, what really impressed me was Kenny the Jet Smith can actually kind of act.
He wasn't bad. Yeah, he
Yeah.
plays a talent agent who's best friends with Sandler's character, and it's there. There were tons of NBA stars or NBA people in this movie. Some of them in very small roles. The lead role, along with Adam Sandler, is played by Juancho Hernan Gomez, who had a few years in the NBA. He played with the Raptors for 1 year and a bunch of other teams. And his brother Willie, who has I think had a bit longer of an NBA career. Neither of them were really big players, but he also is in this movie as one of the guys that's in Bo Cruz's first workout. But tons of other NBA guys are in this movie, including Anthony Edwards, who kind of plays his rival as they're coming up and trying to make it to the draft. And Anthony Edwards, I thought actually also did a really good job of basically just being a trash talking asshole.
Yeah. And the interesting thing is these guys like sports movies are famous for guys coming in for cameos and playing themselves. But that wasn't the case in this movie. Everybody had like an actual role and they were playing a character that wasn't themselves. And I found that really admirable that they were like shoehorning if they weren't shoehorning them in as and just like trying to get clicks for, oh man, Kenny the Jet's in here as Kenny the Jet. No, they're all playing different people.
Well, there were a bunch that were playing themselves. The
Fair enough, fair
NBA
enough.
guys playing NBA guys, but a lot of them it was for those guys. It was just a couple of sentences here and there where they're like, "Oh yeah, this guy could play in the league," kind of thing. Tobias Harris has a little bit of a role in this movie. Kyle Lowry's in it. A couple of the others, but you're right. They're not. Those aren't so much roles as they are filling out the basketball community and actually making it feel more realistic as a movie about a guy who's trying to make it to the NBA. So it wasn't, as you say, just done for clicks. I think it was done with a purpose.
Absolutely.
All right. So the second movie that we've got on this list is a movie called Rebound. Now, this is there are a bunch of movies out there called Rebound. This one is subtitled "The Legend of Earl the Goat Manigault."
A
And
little unwieldy.
yes, it is a little unwieldy. But this is a 1996 HBO movie, so it's not one I don't think this ever actually aired in cinemas. It wasn't that kind of a film. It was just an HBO sort of TV movie, and it's actually really hard to find these days. Like I couldn't really find a way to download it. The only thing you could find are really bad quality copies on YouTube. But you suffer through it if you really want to watch this movie. If hopefully this shows up again somewhere where you can even just rent it on Amazon Prime because I couldn't even find it there. But it's a movie about the real life New York City basketball legend Earl, the Goat Manigault, and it stars Don Cheadle and it's directed by Eric LaSalle. but it also has a great cast. It's got James Earl Jones, Forrest Whitaker, a bunch of other people. It's just a really interesting movie. And I should want to say one thing about his nickname, the GOAT. So this is a player who played in the late 60s, and this was kind of before GOAT was a saying. So there is some discrepancy about what his nickname, the GOAT, is. Like people, I think today probably assume it meant that he was the greatest of all time, which actually, when asked who the greatest player he ever played against, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar famously did say Earl Manigault. But I think it's clear it's just a takeoff on his name. There's Manigault. So that's what it is. I don't think Muhammad Ali was used to say he's greatest of all time in the 60s and 70s, but it wasn't really a popular term back then. So I don't think that's really where his nickname came from. It's this is a basketball movie, but it's also a movie really about the dangers of everything surrounding the game, and it's about wasted talent and promise,
Absolutely. Yeah.
and about one man's struggle to get his life back from crime and addiction to drugs, and about how he can kind of rebuild his life. So I think it's a really, I mean, it's kind of sad, but it's uplifting in a way at the end. This guy manages to find purpose in his life. And it's a lot about sort of street ball culture and history. And obviously, there's a movie later on that we'll talk about that has a lot of street ball in it. But the most legendary street ball of all time was at Rucker Park in Harlem.
Yep.
And a lot of the movie is centered on that. And like anybody who's anybody played in Rucker Park back in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. And a lot of them say that Earl Manigault was the best player on those courts all the time. And this is playing against guys like Wilt Chamberlain and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar and Earl the Pearl Monroe and stuff like that. So it is a sad movie in a way because, as I said, it's about wasted promise. But I think it's a really interesting one.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought up the street ball aspect because this guy's whole career is like shrouded in legend
Mm-hmm.
because obviously we didn't have YouTube and TikTok and nobody had just a camera on hand like everybody does these days. So he has all these kind of fabled moves where one of the ones was a like a double dunk where he would jump up, slam it with his right, catch it when it was on the way down, slam it with his left, all on the same jump. And even he came out and said eventually that that was not true. But yeah, that is a talk
Because
about
of
a
limits, but yeah,
yeah, yeah, the laws of physics.
yeah.
Talk about a bygone era. Like we'll never hear of or see anything like that again. And again, this is one that I never heard of, and I never heard of the man either before you brought this up in our little brainstorming session. And I'm glad you did put this one forth because I love Don Cheadle. He's one of my favorite actors of all time, and to see him, it's just really, really young, and but to still be in a biopic where he spans 20 or so years throughout the entire film is really impressive. Short aside, some of my college buddies and I always had a phrase like an in joke. Anytime a Don Cheadle movie was playing in the background, we'd make everybody turn it up, like because everybody needs a little more Don Cheadle in their life.
That is absolutely true. You never get enough Don Cheadle.
And that
Interesting.
goes all.
One little
Sorry.
tidbit. I mean, obviously, you can't get enough Cheadles in general because at the beginning of the movie, there's a different actor playing a young Earl Manigault, and that's actually Don Cheadle's younger brother, Colin Cheadle, which is kind of
Okay,
funny.
okay.
But he looks so much like him. You're like, how did they get an actor that looks that much like him? And then you read the credits. It's okay, it's his younger brother.
Yeah, I was blown away because I didn't get to do the whole shit ton of research because we were kind of on a time constraint on this one. But yeah, I was like, this is like way before CGI, and this isn't a high budget movie. I was like, is that really just an amazing makeup job on Don Cheadle? Because you're right, he does look so much like him. And okay, so they found his little brother. All right.
Yeah.
Uh, Uh, I love that Nicole Ari Parker was in this. He plays Don Cheadle's girlfriend because I always like her whenever she shows up because not only is she just stunningly beautiful, but she's in one of my other favorite sports movies, which we might talk about down the road, which is Remember the Titans as Denzel's wife. So,
Oh, yes. Yeah, that's right.
but yeah, I was surprised looking for this that it wasn't on HBO Max. You'd think they'd have their entire library out by now. So
You would
it's not
think.
surprising. Yeah, it's not surprising that it was so hard to find this movie. And yeah, the YouTube bootlegs that I was watching were just trash.
Oh, they're terrible quality. Yeah, they're like 320p or
Yeah.
quality or something. They're awful.
And okay, yeah, so looking into this guy, I thought he had a very poignant quote back in 1989. He says, "For every Michael Jordan, there's an Earl Manigault. We can't all make it. Somebody has to fall. I was the one." So yeah, to your point, it was a story of a bit of redemption, but it's just yeah, it's basically all about wasted potential.
Yeah.
All right, so the first one I will present is Coach Carter, 2005, starring Samuel L. Jackson. It was a MTV Films joint, which probably reached their height around 2005, and directed by Thomas Carter, no relation. And it's about this school in Richmond that's just like really
Rich what?
ghetto, really ghetto for lack of a better word. But it's just a rags to riches kind of story where Sam Jackson plays this, hard-nosed ex-player for Richmond, and he wants to take this team and make them into better men more than better basketball players. And that is a theme that will occur in one of the later movies that we talk about. But yeah, I was a huge fan of this movie back in the day.
It is a good movie. It's sort of from the kind of the tough love style of movies like Dangerous Minds or Lean on Me. But you're right. It's a basketball movie, but it's about more than just basketball. And it's interesting because it almost is kind of I wouldn't say inverted, but the first half of the movie is like a traditional sports movie, right up to
Hmm.
winning this tournament championship. And then that's really about the midpoint. And then after that, it turns. And then it's about something entirely different because then that's when he starts finding out about their lack of academic progress, and he shuts down the gym, and the whole community is upset with him, and all this kind of stuff. But I thought that the whole theme of the movie was summed up in this exchange that he has with the principal at one point, where the principal tells him, you and I both know that for some of these kids, this basketball season will be the highlight of their lives. And he just looks at her and he says, well, and I think that's the problem, don't you? Which is a very interesting point. And again, set in the context of there's so much attention on basketball these days. And if you're a basketball star, you can kind of get away with anything and do whatever you want. That in a lot of cases, it does seem like in a lot of schools, the education part of all this suffers. And I think that's obviously the point that this movie was trying to make.
Yeah, I was shocked within the first 3 minutes. There were three or four references to LeBron James. And this is a 20-year-old movie, and he's still not in his prime by any means, but he is still balling out. And he's at least one of the top 20 players in the NBA. So that was crazy to me.
His longevity is just unbelievable. He's a freak of nature. There's no
Yeah.
doubt it. I was surprised that I'd kind of forgotten. It'd been a little while since I'd seen this movie, and I had forgotten about some of the fun. I wouldn't call them cameos, but much smaller roles. People like Ashanti and Octavia Spencer and people like
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
There were a lot of fun smaller roles as well.
Yeah, and I totally forgot Channing Tatum was in this movie. It must have been one of his first.
Right? Yeah, yeah. I think it was an early movie for him too. I think my favorite part of this entire movie, though, was where Samuel Jackson's watching his team and they're winning a bunch of games and they're trash talking their opponents and everything. And then he goes into practice the next day and he starts talking trash to his players for the stupidest shit. He's like, yeah, I did that. I called that. And then somebody tells him that his shoelace is untied, so he ties it. And then he's like, oh my God, look at that bow. I did that shit. Yeah. I love that part. It's so funny.
Yeah, it's pretty like paint by numbers as far as sports movies go, but yeah, in the hands of a lesser actor, this movie would have been a total flop. But Sam Jackson, with his charisma, just brings it home. And spoiler alert, I was always a fan that they actually lost their big game at the end
Mm, yeah.
because storytelling is always about want versus need. And of course, what they wanted was to win the championship, and they wound up losing the first round, but they got what they needed, and that they grew as men and as people, and had that a moral compass at the end of the game.
Again, yeah, because it's a basketball movie that isn't really about the basketball. And it's kind of in the same vein as Rocky, right? Rocky's a sports movie, a boxing movie that isn't really about the boxing. And so the fact that he loses at the end is kind of irrelevant to the growth of the characters throughout the film.
Yeah, and one of the main songs in that movie is called "Let the Drummer Kick" by Citizen Cope, and I used to think it was like really deep when I was yeah, this came out when I was still in high school, and it, it's still pretty catchy, but it has probably the worst lyrics of any hit song that I've ever heard. Didn't mean to make you almost do a spit take there, Martin. And let me just read the first verse for you real
Oh,
quick.
no. Okay, here we go.
Relations, creation, incarceration, determination, equation, humiliation, reincarnation, situation, elation, identification, retaliation, education, inspiration, no substitution, solution, conclusion. Just a bunch of words that end in ION that have no relation to one another.
It's like an old Adam Sandler Cajun Man skit, basically.
Yeah. Yeah, so like when it came on, it was like it's like the real heart of the movie, like Sam Jackson stepping on the basketball, like really deep in thought, contemplating, and then I started listening to these lyrics. I'm like, this is garbage. What the fuck is that? All
Uh,
right, sorry, Citizen Code, but yeah, that gotta go back to the well on that one. All right, so next up we have basically a 180. The only thing in common this has with Coach Carter is that there's a basketball in it.
yeah. Speaking of things that aren't too deep and meaningful,
But very emotional for me. Okay, we got Air Bud, from 1997, uh, directed by Charles Martin Smith and starring Buddy, who actually had a pretty impressive film career in his own right. And he was a rescue dog. He wasn't like bred and trained. He was just found on the side of the road and wound up being one of the most famous dogs in history. And I thought that was a nice fact and really touching.
and on the side
Eh,
of the road, much like Bud in the movie.
Yeah, yeah. It was almost like a biopic. And he did all of his own stunts. I always, even when I saw this when it first came out, I thought there was some, trickery, some, he didn't actually hit it with his nose every time and make the basket. But no, he played soccer, football, but he always got more excited for basketball. So every time you threw that up, he would bop it into the hoop. So yeah, I was very impressed by that. It grossed 27 million on a $3 million budget, so it was a huge hit for Disney. Well, maybe not a huge hit for Disney, but it's still a huge hit. And so it just the story is poor abused golden retriever is left on the side of a road by his asshole clown owner, and he's found by a young boy who just lost his dad and is in need of any kind of affection. Turns out he's a basketball prodigy. Yeah,
Prodigy.
prodigy.
He raised it up for
Stuck between
Prodigy and
protege and
Prodigy.
prodigy. Yeah, thank you, thank you.
Yeah.
And winds up a court custody case is the climax between the boy and the clown, which is weird that it doesn't wind up in a basketball game. But Buddy chooses the one that loves him the most, and everybody lives happily ever after.
Aw, so sweet. Yeah, I know this is obviously this movie has a soft spot for you because I know you've had a lot of golden retrievers. That's kind of your dog, so I
Mhm.
can definitely see why you love this movie. And there are definitely a lot of sweet things about this. I will say overall, this isn't necessarily a great movie. This is probably one of these movies whenever you watched it, I hadn't seen probably since it came out in the '90s. And yeah, it's not great, but I will say it actually has a massive cultural relevance. Like even to this day, a couple recently, you're getting Sydney Sweeney doing SNL skits with basically Airbud, right? So or a version of Airbud. So it's obviously something that compared to the kind of movie it was, it's something that's resonated still to this day, which is kind of funny. I found rewatching it, the beginning is almost like 80s Spielbergian in a way. A
Mm,
kid
mm.
moves to town, doesn't have many friends, single parent. There's a lot of horrible adults in this movie. It's also really slow in developing. Like, there's no way you could make a kids' movie like this today. Like, it's a good 45 minutes into the movie before he even talks to the janitor guy who ends up being the coach. It's just
Yeah.
really slow developing, but you could still kind of get away with that back in the 90s. Not probably not much for not much more time. I'm sure I haven't seen any of the millions of Airbud sequels. I'm sure they're a bit more fast moving. But yeah, this is one that we'll talk about some of the influences that different basketball movies had on others, and one probably that has a bigger influence on any movie that came after it. And this is one too that takes a few things from movies here and there, but it all comes together for a sweet family. As you know, it's a family movie. I think there are probably two movies on this list that we could say more than anything else are kids' movies, and this is definitely the first one.
Yeah, it's just you're right. It's not a great movie. I will concede that point. But I mean, is there more of a pure story than just a boy and his dog?
That
I
is,
mean, when you tear away all the, being jaded and just, knowing the film industry, it's just like sometimes it's just nice to pluck your heartstrings.
yeah. And the
And
funny thing is, we think about this movie as this basketball playing dog, and he is, but that's really only the last couple of minutes of the last game of the entire movie. Like, it's not like he's Teen Wolf and he's playing the whole time, the whole season, right? And obviously, there's the fun words, it doesn't say in the rules that a dog can't play basketball. This ridiculous stuff. And the opposing coach keeps yelling at his players, somebody cover the dog. So it's funny. It's fun. It's a fun.
yeah, yeah, in retrospect, Teen Wolf probably would have been a better pick here, but it's just I have such fond memories of
I didn't.
Airbud
Yeah, I
and
didn't put Teen Wolf on my list either, though. So neither of us had Teen Wolf. It's a pretty also a classic one that maybe wouldn't be as good if I watched it again after having not seen it for decades.
to your point about there being a lot of bad adults, yeah, that the mom is particularly shitty.
Well,
And,
there's the clown. There's the first coach who's horrible and is abusing, like physically abusing his players. Then there's the father of one of the other players who's yelling at him and pulls him off the team because he gets put on the bench for a minute. Like it's just filled with these awful adults.
but to the mom in particular, like what kind of heartless monster doesn't pick up a golden retriever in a clown costume? Like
Well, no, I think she doesn't actually see Bud. I think yeah no I think you're doing her wrong then. I think the kid is the only one that actually sees him. The mom sees the cage. I don't think that she, because by that point Bud gets out and he comes around to the other side of the truck. I don't think she actually sees him at the beginning there.
okay. Well, a golden retriever in a clown costume is like the cutest thing imaginable. So, all right. So, sorry for being so harsh on the mom.
All right, now we're going to switch gears entirely and go to a totally different kind of movie. And so this is Hoop Dreams. which is a 1994 documentary that followed two highly touted Chicago basketball prospects from the beginning of their high school careers all the way through graduation. So the filmmaker, the documentary crew followed them and their families for 4 years, which was pretty impressive, the amount of time this spans. Somehow this movie was not nominated for the best documentary Oscar, even though it was nominated for best editing of just all
Hmm.
movies, despite some people thinking it was possibly the best movie of the year, like not even including documentaries. Like Siskel and Ebert famously had this as their number one movie of 1994. And it's obviously, so that was a huge mistake by the Academy because it's now recognized as one of the best documentaries of any sort of all time. And I think this one, again, talking about the context of this film, as the money started to grow in basketball, and by this point, we're talking the early 90s, and a lot of people started to see basketball as not just a sport, but as a way out of poverty in the inner city. And so it wasn't just a dream about playing basketball, it's a dream about being able to change your life and provide for your family. So there's so many different things going on in this documentary, including, the private versus public school divide, when one of the kids gets kicked out of a private school because his family can't afford to pay, and just some horrible things that happen. Then there's, a lot of drug use in the family, other family members living vicariously through them. Like one of the kids, his older brother is actually a total asshole,
Hmm.
and just is always trying to live vicariously and sort of live his shattered basketball dreams through his brother. And so it's just, in many ways, it's so heartbreaking in the way that it depicts kind of the drudgery of life and all the ups and downs. And in this movie, more often downs than ups. And one of the kids gets injured, and it's a serious injury. And so it's about how injuries affect sports. There's just so many different things going on in this documentary. It's just an unbelievable film, in my opinion.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. I forgot that it was almost 3 hours long, so
Right.
that was
It is a lot
yeah, it was a bit of I had to watch it in two
for four
parts.
years. So yeah.
Yeah, yeah, no, it's not a knock against the film. I just forgot that it was as long as it was. Uh, but yeah, the story behind their getting snubbed is almost as interesting as the stories themselves, because that was a huge deal, and I wasn't aware of this until I actually started researching it a couple days ago. But yeah, it's Price Waterhouse was like sued into turning over the voters their names, but they wound up winning the suit. But that's and Price Waterhouse is the firm that handles all the Oscar votes once they're in, so they remain confidential. Okay, so but about Who Dreams itself, yeah, it really speaks to how fucked up the education system in America is. That was my big takeaway from this rewatch, at least.
Absolutely. There's so many scenes that just leave your head shaking. The coach at the private school, who, if this was ever turned into a movie, would absolutely be played by Robert De Niro. But
Yeah, for sure.
he's this famous Chicago a legend of a coach, but he kind of seems like an asshole for a lot of it. And and then just a lot of the stuff with the school. There's one point where the kid who had been kicked out, so Arthur Agee, he needs to graduate, or he needs to graduate from this new school that he's now been at for 3 years, or at least 2 years by that point. And yet his old school won't even release his transcript
Yeah.
because they still owe a little bit of money from the time when he stayed there, when he played there for a semester back in grade 9, and they refused to release his transcript. So because of that, they're holding up this whole kid's fucking life, and he can't graduate. Like, just horrible shit going on in the school system.
Yeah, and like they would kick him out mid-year, and then you would take him, 6 to 8 weeks to find a new school, and obviously, the public school system is completely fucked,
Yeah.
and the juxtaposition between the public school and then the private school with like the carpeted stairs and having actual facilities and things like that was just really eye-opening because this is 31 years old now, this film, and we're still having the exact same problems today. Like nothing's really improved. So that's really, really eye-opening and fucked up.
Yeah. And it's, I guess, just as an update, because obviously neither William Gates nor Arthur Agee made it to the NBA, but things turned out all right for both of them. They they both went on to do things with their lives. They didn't get caught into a lot of the crime and everything and drugs and everything else that a lot of people around them were getting caught into. And so William Gates, I think, went on to become a pastor. Arthur Agee is a uh, obviously something I'm failing at right now. He's a motivational speaker. He, interestingly enough, for us, the two actually they're still friends to this day, and they actually do a podcast together.
Oh,
Called,
hey.
yeah, the William Gates and Arthur Agee podcast, and
Well,
a lot of it's about basketball in Chicago. So that's very very exciting.
that name could use work. I'll just give a note on that.
Yeah, yeah, it's true. Well, I think it's because when I first heard that, I looked for their podcast, and there are about a million podcasts called the Hoop Dreams podcast. So
Oh,
like, well,
okay.
yeah, nobody's going to be able to find us if we just name our podcast the most obvious thing. So they just went with William Gates and Arthur Agee or whatever. It's some variation of that.
All right, so we have reached halftime,
Yay!
and so we each, as you do in during this time of year, filled out our March Madness brackets, and we're not gonna go game by game because you could follow any number. Speaking of a million podcasts, you can follow any number of people that are much more well versed in college hoops than we are. But speaking of hoops, did you ever play back in the day, or do you still play now?
I don't play as much. I never really played except just kind of intramural. But I always did love playing basketball. Basketball was one of the sports that I loved to play. My two favorite sports and the two sports actually that I was best at are football and basketball, which is kind of funny given my stature. I'm a fairly short guy. But yet those are the two sports where you kind of need size were actually the ones that I was best at. And yeah, so I played a little bit. I never played on a university team or anything like that. Just intramural and pickup and things like that. But yeah, I like playing hoops.
Yeah, same for me. I don't play anymore, but I used to play every single day. My favorite sport growing up was always football, and but it's hard to get that many guys in one place at one time on a field, no matter where you grow up, I guess. But yeah, I was hooping every single day, whether it's just me shooting by myself. You can play 1-on-1, 2-on-2, any number of guys. You can always play basketball. So yeah, I grew up loving the sport. Never reached a high level, but it was always a
It's
blast.
just yeah, it's just always a fun sport to play. I was basically a pure point guard. I like to pass the ball around, play defense. I wasn't a high scorer or anything, but I would always like to set the table and make the passes and set picks. I was kind of I think at the time my growing up, my basketball hero was John Stockton. I tried to play
Mm.
like him, so I'd set the hard picks and play defense, but then also just pass the ball a lot.
Yeah, I even got a nickname from some of my colleagues. I was the Beast, honestly,
Nice.
because I showed up and I was
You were a
not
bruising
tall.
power forward or something, were you?
Yeah, yeah, because I wasn't that tall. I was always chubby, on the slower side, but I'm left-handed, and I could always do a left-handed skyhook from anywhere below the 3-point line. So I would just be scoring and scoring and scoring, and like
That's a sky hook. Love it.
yes, that was my signature shot, and everybody's like, "Oh shit, here comes the beast, yo!" Like, yo, you don't sleep on this, white boy. So yeah, it does. That was
Wet
fun.
dream over here.
So to our brackets, you want to just do who we have in the final four and go from there?
Yeah, so let's just do Final Four, and then we can just make this little friendly wager between the two of us next
Sounds
time
good.
we meet up. If winner buys drinks. So my Final Four. So let me see. In the South bracket, I've got Michigan State coming out. In the West bracket, I've got St. John's. In the what is the Midwest, I've got this is my lowest seed. I've got Gonzaga in a surprise making it because a lot of times the NCAA tournament point guard play does really well, and Gonzaga's got a great point guard who just happens to be Canadian, by the way. Ryan,
Oh, here we go.
so I gotta support my Canadian boys. He's the brother of Andrew Nemhart of the Indiana Pacers. And then in my East bracket, I've got Duke. So those are my final four. And I don't love it, but for my final, I've actually got Duke winning it all. I'm not a huge Duke fan, but I've got Duke winning it over St. John's, and St. John's I think is somewhat of an under the radar pick.
Why do we always have to agree so much on the Unsolicited Film Reviews
Doing- Oh,
podcast?
no. Okay, we did not practice this in advance at all. Who do you got then?
So I do have Duke winning it all,
Okay,
but so I have them coming out of the East. Out of the Midwest, I have Purdue. That's my low seed, and oh, oh, okay. Then on the other side of the bracket, I have Michigan State and Florida. So chalk, basically.
okay. So
So I
we've
have
got Duke and Michigan State. So who do you have Duke beating in the final then?
Michigan State, and on the tiebreaker, I have, which we might have to come down to, I have 74-68, the final score of the national championship game.
Oh, okay. I was just using the ESPN tracker, and they just go for total points, and so I
Okay.
had total points of 165. Basically, I was thinking of something around like a 90 to 75 score, something
All
like that.
right.
So
Yeah. So I have a little more defensive battle
yeah,
lined up. So yeah, we'll see how that shakes out.
exactly. All right. So that's our halftime show. I was gonna bring out and do my red panda routine, but I'll have to save that for another day. Bicycle and dribbling balls on top of china bowls and plates and things. All right, let's get into our top five.
Let's do it. And you didn't have this on your list at all, if I remember correctly, but I had it as my number one because how can you have a list in this category without Space Jam? 1996 live action animated hybrid, Michael Jordan, Bugs Bunny. I'm sure anybody who's watching this, listening to it, knows it and at least respects it, if not loves it. Not a great filmmaking achievement, but I mean, it's no Who Framed Roger Rabbit, but it's always impressive when live action and animation meet, especially before the real CGI wave came in kind of the early 2000s. And I mean, it's a who's who of basketball and comedy because we have everybody from Larry Bird, Charles Barkley, Patrick Ewing to Wayne Knight and Bill Murray.
Yeah,
And Danny DeVito as the voice of the main villain.
that's right.
It was
Oh,
a
Sean Bradley,
Yeah, it was
Larry
a
Johnson.
huge hit. It made a quarter billion dollars, excuse me, on an $80 million budget. And if nothing else, this was a masterclass in marketing.
Yes. Yeah.
Everything from toys to Happy Meals. I mean, Michael Jordan in his own right is a masterclass in marketing from his Nike deals. And one of the great lines was when Wayne Knight showed up. He's like, "Grab your Hanes, grab a Big Mac, we'll drink a Coke." And he just like lists all of Michael Jordan's endorsements that he already had. Strap on your Nikes, and we'll grab a Big Mac on the way to the
Gatorade.
ballpark.
Yeah.
So I guess the plot is kind of secondary to just the premise, but
Lots
uh, the
never.
Lo- yeah, the Looney Tunes, Bugs, Daffy, and company are about to be enslaved by these aliens from Moron Mountain, and they challenge them to a game of basketball. But once the Monstars steal the talent of some of the top NBA players already included. They realize that they're way in above their heads, so they recruit Michael Jordan through a golf hole to play for them, and antics ensue, to say the least.
Exactly. So this is definitely the biggest grossing budget on our entire list. As you say, yeah, $250 million, something like that. And it was, let's just say it was a phenomenon. Everybody knew Space Jam, and it's still, a little bit like Air Bud, maybe even more so. It's still something that's just in the lexicon, in the public zeitgeist. People talk about Monstars still and things like that to this day. So for that reason, it's very popular. And we'll be watching it. The animation combined with the live action wasn't bad, as you say, for the time. It's not Who Framed Roger Rabbit, but it's not terrible for mid 90s. It's the whole movie, obviously, the whole premise and everything is a little ridiculous. Like there's a scene where some of the NBA players who have had their talent stolen go to a medium, and she's trying to do like a seance and figure out what's happened. And she explains everything that happened. And it just in a very matter of fact way. And it sounds so absurd that the players are just like, all right, whatever. She doesn't know what she's talking about and wanders away because so these aliens came down and took, and there's the Looney Tunes. And anyway, but it's a lot of fun. And it's such a it happened in such a particular moment in time. And I think that's why when LeBron did his Space Jam remake, it didn't really work and
Mm.
nobody watched it because this was a particular moment in time where everybody knew that the greatest basketball player on the face of the earth wasn't playing basketball. And so
Hmm.
that's fully in the plot, right? They come down and they steal the talent of all these great players that the aliens see playing basketball. And so when the Looney Tunes have to fight back, who do they recruit? Well, the guy who's actually the greatest player in the world, but he had, Michael Jordan had taken his 2 year hiatus after his third championship and after the death of his father and stuff to go and try to be a bad baseball player. But it's just so, yeah, it's just such this particular moment in time that it's just a lot of fun. I also think watching it again, it's kind of funny that the entire movie is about a wager, basically. And at the very end, first of all, it's about Bugs Bunny making this wager that they can win the basketball game. And then at the very end, Michael Jordan ups the stakes on the wager to get the talent back from the NBA players. And I just think that's very ironic with everything that we've come to know much later about Michael Jordan and the fact that he just liked to bet on absolutely everything. So it's
Yeah,
not
it's very on
surprised that
brand. Yeah.
a major plot point in this movie is him upping the stakes and betting on everything, on basically the fate of the world. It's hilarious.
And this is definitely a case of a soundtrack making the movie
Yes. Yeah.
because that soundtrack went 6 times platinum.
Wow.
And granted, this is back when we still had monoculture and people were still buying CDs and things like that. But I mean, say what you will about R. Kelly, and I will say that he is a human piece of shit.
Yep.
But I believe I can fly as a fucking banger.
Fantastic song. Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, yeah, we discussed this issue in the past. Like obviously, a lot of people can't compartmentalize and separate the art from the artist, and if you don't want to, that's fine. Blah 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 blah. Disclaimer. But yeah, uh, and just yeah, all the songs on that soundtrack were amazing. Like Basketball Jones and the opening one, the title song Space Jam. It just like really got you hyped up to watch the Looney Tunes and Michael Jordan just engage in this just silly, not deep at all, but just it was just a romp. It was fun.
I thought it was funny. There was one line in there that I thought was hilarious that I hadn't remembered at all, where Daffy and Bugs, I think, are talking about what their team name should be. And I think maybe
Oh,
it's Bugs or somebody suggests Ducks. And Daffy goes, "What kind of Mickey Mouse organization names its teams the Ducks?" Which is just such a funny dig at Disney.
yeah, it's such a barb. And there were a couple of those. Like I think it was. yeah, when the other guys were in the therapy sessions and the therapist asked Patrick Ewing if basically if you had trouble performing in the bedroom. He's like, no. He's like, I'm just asking. And then in that same montage, Charles Barkley's in the chapel, like praying to God for his talent back, and he's like, I'll never date Madonna again. It's just like stuff that like if you're a kid you would never get, but
Yeah.
in retrospect they're really funny.
Yeah, it's definitely a fun movie for sure. All right. And then again, switching gears entirely. So, number four on our list is a movie that I don't think would necessarily be described as fun. And that's He Got Game, which is a 1998 movie from Spike Lee. It stars Denzel Washington and at the time, an up and coming basketball star, Ray Allen, who had just finished his rookie season at that point in the NBA. So Denzel plays an incarcerated man who's incarcerated for killing his wife, but his son is the number one basketball recruit in the entire country. And so the governor is a big booster for one of the colleges and lets Denzel's character out of prison for 1 week so he can try to convince his son to go to the to big state, the college that the governor is a big booster of. It's Ray Allen, who's one of there are a bunch of NBA players in a few of these movies. He's probably the one, him and maybe Juancho Gomez from Hustle, who have the biggest roles in
Mm.
these films. And look, while he's not great, he actually wasn't bad considering that he'd never acted before. And interestingly, he never did again, really. Like,
Mm.
I guess he kind of got his fill. Like a bunch of these other guys from that time tried to, Shaq did a whole bunch of movies, and other Barkley's been in tons of things. And even Kyrie Irving had his Drew movie and whatever. But it's interesting that Ray Allen had this, and everybody thought it was a great movie, and he never really acted again. But it's interesting. Spike cast Ray Allen after he initially reportedly wanted Kobe in the role, and then Kobe said he had other commitments. So Spike asked a few people to do some auditions, and so right after his rookie season, Ray Allen went in and did a bunch of auditions with a few of the actors. And the last session he did was with Denzel. And I guess Denzel afterwards gave him kind of the stamp of approval and told Spike, yeah, that's the guy. Hire him. So
Yeah, this just occurred to me when you mentioned Kobe, but it is wild to me that Spike Lee and Kobe have the same amount of Oscars with one apiece. Like
it's crazy.
Kobe won for the short he made called Dear Basketball, and Spike Lee, despite his accolades and near 30-year career, he didn't win till Best Adapted Screenplay for Black Klansman. And yeah, you're right. Ray Allen did a very serviceable job. Wasn't fantastic, but as far as this list goes, he was right up there with Buddy as far as acting goes. No, but
That's high praise coming from you.
yeah, but yeah, it is a really. I thought it was a really cool premise too. That it illustrates like the corruption inherent in every system where excellence in athletics is rewarded over any kind of moral any kind of morals you have.
Mhm.
So yeah, and the interplay between Denzel and Ray Allen was good. Spike Lee coming with his Dutch angles as always, and yeah, it was just it was a solid film. I haven't seen it in 10 years or so, but revisiting it, yeah, I was pretty impressed.
Yeah, it'd been a while since I had seen it as well. And as you say, it's kind of, one of a few different movies that came out around that time in the 90s. This was, I guess, 98, about the corruptive influence of money in basketball. And like there was that movie Blue Chips as well, which was about kind of recruiting and especially it within colleges and the money that was going on and some of the recruiting scandals that were happening at the time. And all of that was all about the influx of money into the NBA. And as the NBA became a much bigger business, it's like everybody in this movie wants their piece. Everybody
Hmm.
wants something from the Ray Allen character. There really isn't anybody who's there just to help him out. And it's
Yeah.
really it's very oppressive, I guess. Just this, what you should think would be this great, tremendous, fun rise of this unbelievable basketball prodigy. But no, it's all so sinister in a way.
Yeah, it's also grimy. Like as you said, they're coming from all angles too. Like nobody's really out for him. Everybody's out to like you said, get their piece. Whether it's friends, family. I mean, even your own father. Like who can you trust in that scenario? And it's no wonder that so many athletic careers only last a heartbeat and they go bankrupt, lose everything, and it's like, oh, you made $15 million. How the hell could you be bankrupt? It's very easy
Yeah,
when you have
crooks and
everybody trying to get their nut. So
exactly. And there's a fun little story just before we move on about the one-on-one scene at the very end of the movie. So the movie kind of has bookends of one-on-one scenes between Denzel's character and his son. In the beginning, he's giving his son a hard time and is not letting him win it all. And then at the end, tables have turned, obviously, and his son's now a better basketball player. And originally, Spike had wanted that one to basically be where Ray Allen's character, Jesus Shuttlesworth, I guess we should mention the name because it's one of the great names in
that is a fantastic name. Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned it. Yeah.
Jesus Shuttlesworth. So when Jesus plays his father again at the very end for basically the contract, and Jesus was supposed to, in Spike's original plan, supposed to just beat him 11-0.
Mm.
And what happened was, as they were playing, Denzel was actually making it really tough on Ray Allen and kind of kept giving him buckets. But it really worked because it amped up the intensity of that final scene. And so
Okay.
because of that, Spike just kind of let it happen and let that be the movie. So in the end, I think the final score ends up being sort of 11-6 or 11-5 or something instead of just a clean sweep. And those were apparently like legitimate buckets that Denzel got on Ray Allen. So not bad. The man,
Wow. Yeah, I never knew that. That's a fantastic story. I never knew Denzel could ball like that.
yeah, apparently back in the 90s he could.
Cool, cool, cool. All right, so next up we got White Man Can't Jump. It's of course the 2023 classic starring Cinco Walls and Jack Hart. Kidding. Not gonna talk about that piece of shit remake. Never saw that just out of principle because of course we're going to
Neither
be
did I.
talking about the 1992 classic starring Wesley Snipes and Woody Harrelson as of course Streetball Hustlers. It was directed by Ron Shelton and written by Ron Shelton as well. It was a very profitable hit. 90 million on a $31 million budget, so about three times its budget. And no college, no NBA in this one. It's just about two street ball players who go out there and try to make their living on courts like it takes place in California, but it's akin to like the Rucker Park of Venice, and has a Rosario Dawson and probably her most acclaimed role. No, it's not Rosario Dawson. Rosie Perez. My bad.
You're thinking he got game with Rosario Dawson was in that one. In the last movie we talked about.
So yeah, okay, two street hustlers, and they're always down on their luck. Basically, their lives come down to who won the last basketball game. And Wesley Snipes is like a bona fide baller, but he's not making enough money to support his family. He notices that this white boy, Woody Harrelson, is really good at basketball, but nobody on that court is going to take a white boy seriously, especially when he dresses like a fucking dork when he does. So,
He really does. But he does on
uh,
purpose so he can hustle.
exactly, exactly. So they all, it's basically just a series of hustles and going back and forth and relationship drama. Uh, Rosie Perez trying to get on Jeopardy, which she does. She wins at Jeopardy, and at the end of the day, there's an alley oop that wins the day for our heroes.
Proving that sometimes a white man actually can jump at
Yep.
the very end of the movie. there's two things I think that make this movie stand out amongst all the basketball movies out there. One is the trash talk. This movie had some of the greatest and cutting, but also just consistent trash talk throughout the entire movie. Every scene, guys are trash talking each other and coming up with new and inventive ways to insult their opponents and get under their skin and everything. It just goes on constantly the whole movie and is really kind of infused with that street ball culture. And then the other thing that I think makes this movie stand out is that some of the individual moves are actually pretty good. Like some of the actual basketball taking place in this, and there were a lot of fringe NBA type players playing a lot of the backup, the supporting roles, guys that didn't even have speaking roles, but playing in a lot of the games. So these guys, this wasn't just a bunch of actors who didn't know how to dribble a fucking basketball. A lot of these guys actually knew how to play. But some of the moves that they would come up with looked so good on the screen. I was
They
so
really did.
weren't necessarily, you know, you tried this in a real game and sometimes you get smacked down, but still they were so fun. And compared to a lot of basketball movies, the basketball just looked good in this movie. So I think those were the two things that make this stand out so much. It's the trash talk and it's the filming of the basketball.
Yeah, I had very similar thoughts. The one huge note I had was this is I kind of want to put this a little delicately, but it was racist in all the best ways. In that, it really mirrored the way that me and my boys would talk shit out on the court, like mix of all races out there, and like nothing was off limits when you get really heated, and it was it was kind of refreshing for a movie that's approaching like 40 years old, almost, but like there's no way that kind of stuff would fly in a scripted film today. And I just thought it was so authentic in the way that growing up I would like we would all just talk mad shit to each other, but then go grab a pizza at the end of the day or something like that. So it's all good at the end of the day. Like no, we all had thicker skin, I guess, and it was all
It's all part of the game, right? It's just
yeah,
all
yeah, yeah, yeah.
game. It's what you kind of expect when you step onto one of those courts, or yeah, maybe less so in kind of the kind of runs I do today, a YMCA run or something. But even then, there's guys who trash talk and everything. But definitely street ball that time, that kind of stuff was just everywhere, and it's part of the game. As you say, you don't. Sure, every once in a while, tempers would flare and guys would start pushing and shoving, but it was kind of the nature of what was going on.
Yeah, you get that aggression out, and
Yeah,
that's it's healthy. You don't bottle all that shit up and just let it out in some kind of violent outrage. Just you're just playing ball.
yeah.
And I guess this is a good time since you were mentioning the actual basketball sequences. It must be so hard to shoot some of these sequences. Like, how many takes do you think like if an actor like really can't shoot, if you're like a director and like, oh man, he's really delivering a good performance. How tolerant are you before you just like, okay, somebody come in and shoot it, and we'll just cut it in a different way. Like, how many takes would it take?
Some of some of them must have taken forever, but I guess also yeah, they just cut it in certain ways. You see the shot, so it's an angle looking at him, and then you see the ball, so they've cut. So it's somebody else's shot. They just probably take a whole bunch of shots of balls going in the net, and then they'll just sort that all out later. Maybe that's how
Yeah.
you shoot that. I don't know. It's they. You mentioned the Rosie Perez Jeopardy subplot to this movie, and it's just so hilarious, but it's so out of nowhere, and almost kind of seems like it's from a different movie, but it's almost the I was gonna say comedic break, but the whole movie's funny. So
Yeah.
especially with all the trash talking and just the everything that's going on. So it's not really a comedic break. It's just so out of nowhere for the rest of this movie. I don't know. I don't know where that came from, but it's kind of fun. It's entertaining.
Yeah, and the chemistry between Wesley Snipes and Woody Harrelson was just incredible.
Yeah.
I mean, that's really what the movie boils down to is like if you don't have two leads that can gel together like that, then it's not really a movie. So
So here's one final question for you though. Was it all a dream? Because at the very beginning of the movie, we see not Wesley Snipes. We see Woody Harrelson's character. I can't remember his character's name at the moment. Walk onto the court and in Venice Beach, put the ball behind his head and lay down on the court for a nap. And then he wakes up as there's basketball playing. So that's the very beginning of the movie. So is the entire thing just a dream?
that is so fucking deep. I've never even heard that put forth. Wow. That just like that's really depressing to think of. He could be just some homeless guy in Venice that had some kind of success as a high school basketball player who lost his girlfriend, lost his best friend, and just wow, man, way to bring it
It
down.
might help explain why the whole Jeopardy thing seems so surreal in a way. If it is part of a dream, right?
Yeah. Did you come up with that, or is
Yeah.
that a thing?
No, it's the first thing I thought as I was rewatching and I saw
Oh,
him laying down. I'm sure it's a thing though. I can't believe I'm the first person to ever think of that.
yeah.
I'm sure other
Might want
people
to
have mentioned that before, but
revisit that if anybody wants to leave a comment. But yeah, that's kind of depressing to think about. So again, basically a complete pivot in genre, and the movie on here that features the least amount of basketball. It is Air, the 2023 kind of biographical drama that stars Ben Affleck and Matt Damon, and it's about how the shoe Air Jordan came to be. They Ben Affleck's a Nike executive, and they are just
Phil,
hell bent. Hmm?
he's Phil Knight,
Yeah,
the founder of
and
Nike.
they're just hell bent on recruiting Michael Jordan to be the face of their new shoe. They put all their chips into one basket. In that case, it has a sports movie feel to it, even though it features very little basketball and no live basketball. Actually, it's all just archive footage of Michael Jordan, and it has Jason Bateman, Marlon Wayans, Chris Tucker, and probably the one that steals the show, Viola Davis. And of course, as we all know, they are successful in their
Matt
endeavor.
Damon,
Hmm?
and Matt Damon, of course.
Yeah, I mentioned him.
Oh, I thought you said Ben Affleck. They're
I
both in.
did. Yeah.
Okay, okay.
uh, yeah, directed by Ben Affleck, who
Right.
is probably a better director than an actor if you look at his total catalog. Written by Alex Convery, and yeah, just a really well written story, and just what did it made its budget back, but just barely. It was about 90 million to make, and it only made about 90 million at the box office. So not a huge hit by any means. Actually, probably lost money if you take in marketing. But for me, it was one of the best movies of that year in 2023.
I really like this movie as well. I maybe didn't have it quite as high as you did on the list, but it was definitely on my list. And I need to correct myself because earlier I had said that Hustle was our newest movie, and obviously it's not because Hustle came out in 2022. This is 2023, so this is the newest one. It's there are times when it becomes a bit overbearing in terms of how many references and little bits of trivia is trying to jam into scenes, but I still loved all the 80s stuff, and it was a lot of fun. I just thought sometimes it's like, okay, that's a bit artificial, them trying to put that little anecdote into that scene. It was still tons of fun. And it's interesting to look at these movies and talk about them like we're doing all at the same time, because even though it's a much newer movie than something like He Got Game, it's obviously set before He Got Game. And so it's set when the NBA was just on the cusp of becoming big business. So instead of the NBA and basketball being something that's all corrupted by big money and everything, this is really the start of that. But it's not, because it doesn't presuppose all of the all of the corruptive influences. It's much more of an uplifting movie about the little guy, Nike, who at the time, they
Yeah.
start out they're saying that they only had 17% of the shoe market. And so they were the absolutely the underdog when it came to trying to get Michael Jordan to be their pitch person. And it's just a fun movie, as you say, really well written in many parts. Some great acted scenes. The acting, I think, is all on point. I think my favorite moment in the entire movie, and this is really one that is about basketball, it's when Sonny Vaccaro, played by Matt Damon, he bursts in the office of Rob Strasser. So Sonny Vaccaro will become, or became, the head of the Air Jordan division. And then Rob Strasser was basically their publicity guy. So he's the guy who's credited with a lot of the Nike commercials and a lot of the way that Nike became such a big success in terms of how they marketed themselves. He's basically the marketing genius. Anyway, so Sonny Vaccaro bursts into Rob Strasser's office, and Strasser, and this is played by Bateman, and he makes him rewatch the video of Michael Jordan hitting the NCAA championship winning shot in 1982. And it's because he thinks he's seen something. And he tells the story about how the coach, how Dean Smith, is the big knock on him was that he had never won the big thing, and that he never really started freshman. And in this moment, he's got this All-American James Worthy on his team. And yet in that moment, he trusts this freshman and draws up the play for Michael Jordan to hit the shot. And then he's like, okay, now knowing all that, watch the play again. Knowing that Michael Jordan knows that the shot of his life and the shot of Dean Smith's life to that point is coming to him. And you watch the clip, and it is pretty amazing that Jordan is just totally relaxed. He's just hanging out, just kind of waiting for the ball, because he knows that ball comes to him, he's going to sink that shot. And it really is about almost that pure aspect of basketball, of knowing just when a player gets it, right? When a player is going to be that good. And so that's the thing I love about this movie, and that scene in particular, I think, was what really illustrated it.
Yeah, very well put. My favorite moment is probably the climactic moment where Viola Davis is on the phone and she just kills it. It's hard for actors to act on the phone because you're not opposite your other actors, so that's kind of an underappreciated art. But
Absolutely.
so she says that this new shoe is just a shoe until my son steps in it. And that was just like put a stamp on it. That's the quote of the movie. And she actually ad-libbed that. That wasn't in the script. They did a
Oh,
couple
really?
takes where they let her kind of vibe.
Because the other characters had said a version of that earlier too. So did they go back and rewrite that, or was hers a take on that line that had been earlier in the film?
It was a
No?
take on it, so it
Oh,
wasn't
okay.
it wasn't like she created that out of whole cloth.
Right,
But she had a couple options, and she went with that one, which
right.
was the most powerful line of the entire film. So, and Viola Davis is amazing, and it's also funny that we never actually see MJ's face
Yeah.
react to the plays. We always see the back of his head because obviously you're not gonna like. It would have cost another 100 million to bring Michael Jordan in and de-age him and do all that kind of shit because that's not what it was about. It was about the negotiation between um, Nike and the family. So
Mhm. Yeah, and obviously in this case, Michael's mother was a major influence on all of this and kind of directed things back in those days. I also think it worked in part because that's for two reasons. One, that's kind of what was going on in the story. Like the Nike executives weren't allowed to talk to Michael directly. They
mhm.
were dealing with the mother and through the agent David Falk, who's a good agent but a total asshole. And so for that way it worked in the story, but then also Michael Jordan's just such a recognizable figure. that to see anybody trying to play Michael Jordan, I think would be kind of weird and would just stand out to us as just obviously fake. So it worked that way too, that we'd never really see him face on.
Yeah, yeah, great point. Yeah, I'm glad you brought up David Falk because Chris Messina just knocked it out of the park with what a
Yeah.
douchebag that guy was. So
Yeah.
that's my last point on that one.
All right. So now we come to our number one movie, and that is Hoosiers, which is a 1986 movie starring Gene Hackman, RIP. It's very loosely based on the story of an Indiana school winning the state championship from, so there were this tiny school from a rural community and they won against a powerhouse city team. So the actual team won in 1954, and this movie takes a lot of dramatic license and changes the name of the teams and does it in 1952, but is very loosely based on that. Because famously, for a long time, up until I think maybe the 90s, Indiana State Basketball Championship didn't have divisions and it was just open to all teams. So it was one of the few places where a tiny school with an enrollment of 80 kids could actually go up and compete against some of the big powerhouses. So it's the oldest of the movies we've got here in 1986. And that makes sense because although there were obviously sports movies before this, this is really the template for a basketball movie. And so it's almost impossible. We've got it at number one, but it's almost impossible to judge it in the context of all the movies that came afterwards because it sort of stands alone because so many of the things, so many of the tropes that you see in basketball movies came from this movie. Things like, there's a slow clap, for instance, in this movie in the locker room. There's the coach who comes to town and the town doesn't understand what he's trying to do and wants to fire him and is prevented by the players speaking up. There's the bit about, that sort of Coach Carter has that,
Exactly. Yeah,
some
yeah.
other things. There's the team is practicing without the basketball and people think this is weird and that happens in Air Bud, right? There's the player who walks out of practice and has to be allowed back onto the team by doing his penance. And again, that's Coach Carter. And there's, the bad player, the worst player on the team getting subbed in at the last minute and hitting the winning shot. That's, famous trope. And then of course the famous, this court is the same size as the one we play on thing, that whole speech. There's just so many of those things that we now think of as cliched, and they are, but that's because a lot of them came from this movie. And when this movie did them, they weren't cliche. So I think it is appropriate still that it's the number one movie on our list. It has some great acting. Gene Hackman was great. Dennis Hopper plays this alcoholic father of one of the kids on the team who also becomes an assistant coach. He's also fantastic in this movie. And so a lot of the other movies that we talked about were about a lot of different things, like the corruptive influence of money or drugs or dogs.
Dogs playing basketball.
Exactly. Lots of different things. This one really is a pure basketball movie. It's about the team and about the team trying to win the championship, which obviously they do. So it's number one on our list, and I think that's kind of where it belongs.
Yeah, full disclosure, confession, I had never seen Hoosiers front to back
Oh my
until about
wow.
4 or 5 days ago. And no real reason for it. It's just I kind of knew the plot before
Right.
I watched the movie,
Yeah,
so I was like, okay, I'm sure it's fine, but do I really want to spend 2 hours watching a movie where I know beat by beat what's going to happen?
fair enough.
And all your points are incredibly salient. And yes, everything about it was completely cliche, but as you said, it's not cliche if they're the ones that set the standard. And while there are a few moments that made me want to roll my eyes, I kept reminding myself that no, the ones you should be rolling your eyes at are the ripoffs, like
All the
fucking
copycats.
Coach Carter was a complete ripoff of this movie. And yeah, I saw Coach Carter back in 2005, yeah. And yeah, I thought it was a great movie. And now I look back and it's like, damn, dude, there was nothing original about Coach Carter except there were a lot more black people. To be fair, we didn't see a black person in Hoosiers until the championship game.
That is, and I have heard this criticism before, and it's absolutely a legitimate criticism that there is some odd racial stuff at the end of this movie, where in the
Yeah,
final game, the team that they're playing against, they're a team of all white players, and that I'm sure was historically accurate. But the team they're playing against in the movie, in the final game, is mostly black players, and so there is a little bit of this, like, oh, the white kids are going to triumph against that. So yeah, there is a little bit of racial ickiness about this movie. Fair. So if people don't like it for that reason, I can totally understand that.
yeah, it was kind of cringy, and I hate using that term, but it did kind of. I actually did make that face as we are right now, like the teeth.
Yeah.
It's kind of awkward. Like, go Hoosiers and all. We've been with these guys for an hour and a half. Like, we want them to win, but at the same time, there hasn't been a black person the entire movie until just now as the villain. So yeah, I had no idea Dennis Hopper was in this movie.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
watch it. I was like, holy shit, man. Yeah. And that was back in his prime. Yeah, he's incredible in anything he does. So yeah. Oh, uh Gene Hackman. I've never been the biggest fan of his. Like, I always knew he was great. Like, French Connection, uh my probably number one most popular movie I saw him in was The Replacements, but that was a comedy,
Okay.
a football comedy at that. But he has some of the most.
Unforgiven. I mean, he had to. Yeah.
Oh,
We,
of
we,
course,
we could
yeah,
go forever listing Gene Hackman movies, I
yeah.
guess.
But he has some of the most sincere eyes in this movie, and that's like really the adjective that stuck out to me when I was taking a couple notes about this. Yeah, it's just you really believe that he he's in this movie. Like, he's so believable as an actor and as a character in this.
He really is. He had this unbelievable talent with his smile. I found that is he could smile in so many different ways, and
Mm,
in a lot of movies, it's kind of this almost mostly when he's playing villains, he can kind of do this smarmy, like, I'm powerful and I'm getting one over on you smile. But in this movie, as you say, the smile is so sincere and authentic throughout most of this movie that it's a totally different kind of thing, even though what he's doing with his face is mostly the same, but
mm,
there's a slight nuance to it. He really was a very good actor.
yeah, 100%. So that's it for our March Madness special for 2025. Next up, we're gonna have April Fool's special, and we're gonna get into some of the best twists in movie history. Not necessarily the ones that fool the audience, but ones that fool both the character and the audience. So, like, little tricks that we find amusing in.
Fooled. Yeah.
Yeah, I won't get fooled again. All right, we're running a bit long, so thanks for joining us, and we will see you next time on the Unsolicited Film Reviews podcast. Happy watching for
Bye.
NCAA tournament.